Here we are at the very last video about fungi. By the time this is over, you'll be able to describe the characteristics of fungi, provide some examples, and explain why they are important. The study of fungi is called mycology. Anytime you see the ending ology, it means study of. All fungi have to eat other things to get their food. A lot of people believe that they are photosynthetic. They are not. They are all heterotrophs. Examples include mushrooms, yeasts, and molds. And just a little fun fact, the largest fungus, this is part of it at the bottom here, is called Armillaria, and most of the fungus is underground in structures called hyphae, which we will talk about in this video. It occupies 3.1 square miles, which is about the size of a small city. Crazy. The body plan of fungi, they have cell walls, and the material that makes up their cell walls is called chitin, whereas in plants, it's cellulose. Some are unicellular like yeast, the picture to the right here, but most of them are multicellular like mushrooms and molds. Multicellular fungi are made out of thin filaments, and those filaments that I mentioned before are called hyphae. And when you put a lot of hyphae together, it makes up a mycelium. So a mycelium is a mass or a mat of hyphae that makes up the body of a fungus. So what you're seeing on the bread over here is mycelium, and if you could zoom in, it would be made out of hyphae. All fungi are saprophytes, meaning they decompose other things, and the way that they get their nutrients, it's the opposite of what we do. What fungi do is they secrete digestive enzymes, it breaks down the substance outside their body, and then they suck up the nutrients. So they digest their food, and then they ingest it. Whereas in humans, we ingest our food, we bring it in, and then we digest it. Most of them live on dead matter. However, you have some that are aquatic and some that are parasitic, some that are mutualistic, so they have symbiotic relationships with other organisms. Most can reproduce both asexually and sexually, and there are advantages to both ways because conditions vary, and when conditions are good, asexual reproduction is really fast. All they do is they either split in half or a little piece comes off and becomes a new organism. That creates clones though, so in bad conditions there's not a lot of genetic variety if they're reproducing asexually. More genetic variety means a better chance to survive. So in poor conditions, the method of reproduction is going to be asexual reproduction. Spores are one of the forms of asexual reproduction, and these are haploid cells, half the amount of DNA, and they are genetically clones compared to the parents. Does not need to be fertilized to develop, and it just gets carried away by wind organisms or sometimes cannon-like structures. Over to the right here is a puffball mushroom that you can see the spores leaving the mushroom in a nice big cloud, carries them away so they can go form somewhere else. Another method is by budding, which yeasts do. A little piece pinches off and it forms a genetically identical clone to the parent. Sexual reproduction occurs between hyphae. And instead of male and female, there's a plus hypha and a minus hypha, and they combine together their genetic information, and you end up with what's called a zygospore, and then that becomes the next fungus. This zygospore, because it's a combination of DNA, is unique. We classify fungi into phyla. Before, when we looked at protists, there were so many different groups that I didn't even worry about phyla because there's a ton. Basically, with fungi, there's three main phyla. Zygomycota, most of those fungi are terrestrial, meaning they live on land, and your example would be a black bread mold. Basidiomycota are probably the ones that you're most familiar with seeing when you think of like mushrooms. However, there's lots of different kinds of mushrooms and things lumped into this group, and there's even a ton of variation within species. So white button mushrooms over here, there's lots of different types of button mushrooms within that species. Ascomycota, most of them again are terrestrial. You find them all over the place, even Antarctica. Many of them are symbiotic with other organisms. An example would be baker's yeast. Now, just a side note, because we're going to be dissecting mushrooms, you should label this on your picture. The cap of a Basidiomycota button mushroom is this top part up here. The gills are represented in this yellow portion, and inside those gills you have spores. You'll be looking at a gill in your lab, you'll take it out and then examine it under the microscope. The stalk is made out of hyphae, those thread-like filaments all bundled up together into that structure where you'll be able to pull it apart and take a look at those pieces as well. Importance. Fungi are decomposers which help cycle nutrients. Many of them are parasites. Athlete's foot is caused by a fungus. Cordyceps is this white fungus on this moth here. It's a parasite. Some are mutualistic, so they have positive relationships. Mycorrhizae, or mycorrhiza, is between a fungus and a plant, and both help each other. Lichens, growing over here, is between a fungus and algae, or fungus and cyanobacteria. If you want to know more about these relationships and who benefits, well, they both benefit because it's mutualistic, but why they benefit, just Google it, take a look. There are other types of mutualistic relationships between leafcutter ants, ambrosia beetles. Again, if you want to know how a fungus can help a leafcutter ant, Google it. Just open up a new window, search it. Fungi provide us with food, so yeast helps us make bread. Fermented foods like soy sauce and cheeses. Down here you have blue cheese that is actually the fungus growing within it, which that just does not look appealing to me. Truffles. The kind of truffles that you find at like Target or World of Variety that are cheap are not true truffles. Real truffles are hard to find. They're a fungus, and pigs are actually trained to find them, and they are dug out of the ground then, and they're sold as a delicacy. Fungi also help us with pest control by controlling bacteria. Many fungi produce antibiotics, and then they can also compete with bacteria for space and nutrients, and if they outcompete them, the bacteria can't survive. Some parasitic fungi help control insects, which protects our crops. Other diseases would be poisoning from fungi. Many of them look the same, so the destroying angel just sounds awful. Here's the edible puffball. The destroying angel is not edible. It would kill you. You wonder how many people died from eating mushrooms that are not edible and helped us figure out today which ones are. There are many parasites on humans besides just crops and other things. Yeast infections, ringworm, athlete's foot are all caused by fungi. And also many people have allergies. Think of black mold in houses is a fungus that many people have reactions to. Now that you've seen this video, you should be able to describe the characteristics of fungi, provide examples, explain why they are important, and then look in your note packet to see what you need to do next. As always, if you have any questions, please come see me.